Hello, welcome to Global Business. This is the fifth edition of Peng. We are in Chapter 6, Foreign Direct Investments. As always, this is not a substitute for class and is not a substitute for you studying the work on your own. Remember, you have to put in a couple hours every week of studying the chapter, any other resources available through your instructor, and through the publisher. With that being said, let's get to it. And I will be mentioning pages in the chapters in the book along the way. First thing, as always, what are our learning objectives? Essentially, why we're talking about FDIs, the resulting organization, location, internal advantages, the political aspect of it, two leading debates, and how we can draw some conclusions towards the end. First, let's get around to some terminology. And we're going to start on page 193 of your textbook. Get that out of the way. And I have a dark carbonated beverage, and you hear my audience in the background. Slide 4. A couple of things we're going to look at. When we talk about foreign direct investments, the D is emphasized quite a bit as far as direct investments. Now, there are a couple of ways you can get around to this. One is you're investing in the ownership of other companies, either through stocks and bonds, which is another class, but they are both forms. Well, stocks are a form of ownership, bonds are a form of lendership. So you are either loaning a company money or you are providing income or cash through the one mechanism better known as investing inside the company itself. The other is if the state-owned funds decide to actually buy parts of the company. The last and not least is if you are actually controlling some of the internal mechanisms such as the company's management and things of that nature. You can achieve that through the other two. If you own enough of the company, you have the ability to actually put some of your own people in the company to make management decisions, so to speak. Slide 5, we're on page 194. Another way of actually getting some influence into another company in another country is what is known as horizontal. These companies tend to duplicate the same actions or in their same fields, and what you're trying to do is control some of the assets that go with this particular company in another country. Countries A and countries B. And in your textbook, it uses an example of British Petroleum or BP and the Nigerian fuel company, and we'll just call that NNC and shorten it up. What happens if you have two companies and they're doing the same thing? What you run into is, while they may be doing everything as far as the value added, which is you take a raw material, you add some type of processes and make it more acceptable for the public or easier to use, what you might want to do is actually just shift over to the other country and have them do part of the process to get the final outcome. So this is what you're looking at. For the sake of argument, you are manufacturing cell phones. You can do it locally or you can do it at another country. You may need extra capacity and you decide to do it in another country as well. So all you're doing, again, is just the horizontal aspect of it. You're both putting the phones together, the final assembly, but one may be for the domestic market, one may be for, say, Africa. So you have a plant in Africa for that part of it. Now, as the name would indicate, if we're talking horizontally, that is straight across. Vertically is when you have different parts of the value chain put together in different areas in the other country. You may be handling the final assembly, but you may get the components from another country and possibly do some different marketing. They may have a department that's actually better at those two pieces. So you might offshore those particular aspects of you coming up with a final good or service. And this is what we were just talking about. You can either go up or downstream. Back to the phones idea. If you're looking at this as far as upstream, now you might be looking just as the plastic casing. It's manufactured somewhere else. If you're looking downstream, once it's put together, it might simply be packaging. It might be, again, marketing and things of that nature. So it's where in the assembly process it is, the raw materials, refining it, and things of that nature. And it can go in either direction. Slide 8, we're on page 195. The amount of directing, again, throughout the year, if you're referring to this, you're trying to track how it goes as a manager, in which direction, horizontally, vertically, up or down. When you're going out, it's going to another country. When it's coming in, it's from that country coming back to you. Now, when you're doing the foreign direct investment, it doesn't always mean that you're sending everything out and it's not coming back. You may have some country that has a particular or unique resource and you need to bring it to your country. Let's say you wish to make a particular type of piano or guitar, and you need a unique piece of wood or something to go into that particular production. So you are trying to lock up control of a particular type of tree in another country just so you can have that raw material brought to you, compared to you just sending that piece out to another country to complete it. Okay. Now that we have a bit of terminology and the directions and things of that nature in the FTD, we'll have that for the rest of the chapter. Then we have to figure out what we are going to do with this. And back to our MNNs, or multinational enterprises. Keep track of all the terms, write those down, so it'll be important as we move forward. One versus the other. Now, why in the world do we gauge in these things at all? Well, this goes back to the things that we've talked about in the past. Sometimes you just don't have certain resources, and it's far better for you to get the resources from somewhere else. The example I like to use all the time is if you are in Alaska, a very cold area for those who are not U.S. citizens, it is the North Pole. If you wish to take a lot of fruit, that'd be a difficult thing to grow fruit in Alaska. If you happen to like pineapples, you might just have to do trade with someone in Hawaii. So one of the keys for doing this is simply raw resources that you cannot get anywhere else. And as the slide indicates, location, location, location. The other advantage is that they may have a better internal system. There may be some bit of intellectual property that they have. They may have a manufacturing process that you simply don't. So those are the things that actually come to mind when we're talking about why would you send your manufacturing process or services or goods overseas, because of those things. The other things, again, sorry missed, is an idea that once you have those, you want to actually control it, which is where the organ ownership comes in. So the OLI. Now, in order for you to actually become a multinational company, you pretty much have to manufacture something in another country. If you're exporting it, that's really not what we're talking about. A multinational enterprise, you actually have to manufacture something on a foreign soil. So there's kind of the difference between you just importing and exporting and you becoming a multinational enterprise. Other ways that you can get around this rather than simply putting a plant up, you might just actually get into an agreement where you're licensing the technology to someone. Maybe they put their logo on it, maybe you leave your logo on it, and then you actually can say that the manufacturing process is in another country, and we'll get around to some other advantages as we go on. But be warned, it's not going to work in the ideal situation as much as you may like. You will have problems. If you don't have problems in the end, at the beginning, you'll probably have problems along the way. Just a natural evolution. Now, let's talk about these things a little bit more. One of the advantages that you have when you're doing the multinational is you have ownership. Love this chart. We're on slide 13 on page 198. How many foreign and domestic companies are running inside each country? Well, as you can see, U.S. being one of those great capitalistic countries has quite a bit going on. But you'll notice most of these are Western style countries and they do a lot of trade internationally. Some countries specialize in having country or manufacturing in other locations. You notice all the way in the bottom, India tends to do that. That could be for a multitude of reasons. Lack of resources, different capital restrictions. Politically, it may be advantageous to do this in other areas. So it's truly complicated. The idea isn't to answer the question on why certain countries have such an imbalance and why others don't. Just understand it exists, and you'd have to take these things apart one by one in order to get it. Reasons why you would do you prefer the FDI to the licensing. Well, one of the primary reasons is a lack of control. Essentially, all of this falls down to that. One is you don't know what's going to happen. Once you've handed out the secrets to your particular brand of cookie, you've gotten grandma's cookie recipe and now you've handed it off, you don't really control it over anymore. They have your secrets, which might be a bad thing. The second is you don't have any control of the manufacturing as much. They are licensed to do it, but they may not do it in a way that is acceptable to you. You have certain standards, and if they're not meeting those standards, well, you run into a problem. Last but not least, you might be teaching your competitors. In the textbook, it does give an example of licensing, and the company that you're working with simply turns around, takes all of your resources, and becomes a competitor. The ideal example in your textbook is Pizza Hut lost control, and all of a sudden, now someone is the pizza company competing with them. Not a good idea. And if we were in class, we might get into a discussion about pros and cons. Second, ownership is good. Where are you going to be at? Location, location, location. An amalgamation, having everything in one location and certain economic activities are great. You get to work with the local workforce. You get to understand it. You can actually understand the market a lot better if you are on the ground and you retain control. So it is a good idea. You can use the local resources. Getting everything locally is much better than you going through the process of trying to get everything imported. If you have a reasonable amount of resources you can have locally, that's what you want to do. Now, one of the advantages in this particular instance is the fact that you get to work with other people, and the knowledge that is gained by working together and pooled resources tends to spread out. Working in isolation may be good points. You don't have the disturbance of people walking in your office and asking you questions. The downside is you don't have the advantage of people coming up with a shortcut or multiple heads coming together and coming up with a better solution. So you run into this on both sides. We're just looking at the advantages. If you are in a position where you are near your customer or you have additional resources, one of the additional resources would be intellect by wherever you are at. And you also can study the suppliers, the buyers, and things of that nature. When you get to a foreign country, what you want to do is actually understand how it works. If you are first, you can be the trendsetter. You have, I'm not going to use the words oligopoly, but you have an oligopoly if you're the first one there. Competition will come at some point, but if you're the first one there, you have a distinct advantage and you set the tone for everyone to follow after that. So this is a plus, especially if you can get there before everyone else, as long as you understand the marketplace. If you think about it, that would be something Apple did. The rest of the industry has worked quite hard to make sure that it's called a smartphone, not an iPhone. The words refrigerator and Kleenex are so ubiquitous now, nobody thinks. Those are actually companies. So being first and setting the trend to the point where your company, your product is now seen as an adjective for that product is a pretty good thing. Last of the OLI, internalization of advantages. Seems to be stuck. There we go, slide 20, and we're on page 205. 204 and 5, actually. All right, when you have international companies, because you are all on the same page, an example we were talking about Nigeria and Great Britain, you can actually move resources around. You have some type of budding relationship where it's a joint venture or something of that nature. You see, one country is doing more exporting, the other is doing more importing. And now we have a downstream as far as Nigeria to Great Britain. If they don't need to do the refinery and they can get it done somewhere else, it's a much easier task for them. The extra capacity can now be shifted off to another place, and now you can actually take that workload off and do something else, or produce more because now you have more refinery capacity. When you're working with two companies in different countries, again, the value-added chain, you're trying to see who does something better. Gets back to an economic term when we were talking about absolute advantage and comparative advantage. One versus the other. You're trying to figure out who does something better, or perhaps you just don't need to do something at all, which would in this case be refining the crude, so you can send the crude over as is, which you don't have to raise the price because you eliminated the step of refining it. You'd have to add that. And if it's just as costly in Great Britain, you might as well just do it yourself. Now, not everything is, ice cream and sunshine and rainbows. Sometimes you have problems. Three primary problems. You will run into conflicts at different points. Okay. Problems that you may face deal with unexpected volatility or resistance to this brilliant idea, although it has its flaws. It's a pretty good idea. In reality, and we are still on page 205, not everyone is going to be ecstatic. As I mentioned, a couple of problems you have. What if you're the country and the jobs are moving? Or what if you're the country and someone's coming in taking jobs domestically? The political backlash isn't a good thing, and you'll find a lot of people who are going to be upset about that. In an absolute free market arena, and we're talking about economists again, since economy is pretty much the birthplace of all business subjects, I'll call you the economist to a little bit of a degree. What you're looking for is they would suggest that it's all going to work out in the best interest for everyone and everyone's going to be happy. Big party will happen. It doesn't quite work that way. Politicians may view that as, well, stuff is coming in, jobs will be created. Well, the local market might not see it that way. Last but not least, in order to get that, there has to be some bit of analysis. You have to weigh the pros and cons. Or you also look at it as, what are the benefits versus the cost you're going to pay? Another common comment is the NFL, no free lunch. There will be cost to pay to someone. If the cost outweigh the benefits, you will not have that direct investment. So what are we going to use this for? How are we going to try and figure this out? Well, your textbook has a lovely little flow chart where, like everything else, you're trying to figure out what do you gain and what do you lose. And as you can see on our lovely y-axis, we have the host and the home country. And the host is the recipient, the source is the home country. And on our y-axis, we have benefits and cost. Well, we'll start in cell 1 and then move on to 3. The host country is going to get new technology, new money, jobs should be created. The home country, well, if I'm doing those things, it's probably a little cheaper. We're getting into some exports, which means we're expanding our market, which should be good for the company. Now in cells 2 and 4, if you're the host, you're losing a little bit of sovereignty, which means other people are coming in and they may try to control things. Not a good look. Some of the competition may push out local competition. And sometimes you get capital floating out. I'll give you an example. A lot of companies go to Africa to mine diamonds. Okay. Well, you get the local market. They're the ones who are getting some jobs. Obviously, you can't outsource a diamond mine. However, where's the money going? To put it into some perspective, the way some people will say is they're paying pennies to the miners and then they sell the diamonds at a huge markup in the open market. So the money, the bulk of it, is not in Africa. If you're the home country, money is definitely not going to be spent locally. It's going to go to outflow of cash. And local workers will not be able to work. If you're outsourcing the jobs, obviously you're not getting anything done domestically, which you may face a pretty good backlash. Now, as we've mentioned in there, these are some of the things that you have to look out for. And the book gets into a little more detail on that. We're looking at page 209, 208, and 209 as far as we're going through this. As we mentioned, the host country does have some gains internationally. Perhaps they're getting some additional knowledge and things about foreign markets. You're creating jobs directly and indirectly. Just remember, when you create a business, it's not just the business that profits. It may be the surrounding businesses. Other small shops may form. Maybe the building, you need to hire a cleaning crew at night. Well, if you're not cleaning it, you're hiring a domestic market, someone to clean out the building, do the maintenance and things of that nature. The cost we already talked about. You lose some sovereignty. You may derive some domestic firms locally there out of business, and we already talked about the flow of money back and forth. The home country, same thing. You get more earnings because you are expanding your businesses. It may be something that you're not going to do domestically anyway. In that case, it's not that big of a deal. If you were doing it domestically and you decide to outsource the activity, now you have a different story. And last but not least, we discussed this before, tax evasion and tax avoidance. The difference between the two is 15 years. Bad accounting joke, but there it is. Sometimes you move your operations because you get better taxes, meaning lower taxes than primarily what you would have domestically. Now, the country that you're going to is going to like it because the taxes weren't there. The country that you're not putting the manufacturing in is not going to like it because those are tax dollars they're missing. Okay. Now that we've talked about the advantages and disadvantages, a bit of the terminology, now let's get around to the players, the multinational enterprises, and the governments involved in these things. Like anything, it is a lovely, lovely dance. What you find is that both parties come to the table and they expect one thing. And what you'll find is one thing leads to another. You don't have it the same way that you thought about it, and it tends to evolve quickly. What you will find is you've gone from just the straight up bargaining, okay, negotiations, this is the way this goes, to what we call obsolescing. Meaning, the bargain starts to evolve. Both parties start to see either advantage or disadvantage, and they want to renegotiate. First time around, the company and the government, wherever you're going, you have regulations you have to follow. They negotiate terms. Everyone signs. We're all happy again. We're nothing but sunshine and ice cream. Then one of two things will happen. If it doesn't work out, the company will just tend to walk away and call it a loss. Okay, no harm, no foul. If it turns out to be a profitable venture, now the host government sees this as, oh, okay, you're making a lot of profits. Maybe we need to renegotiate. The reason you negotiate is because the company doesn't want to lose the profits. The multinational has a new revenue source. They can either A, take a little bit less profit, or B, eliminate the profit completely. And most businesses do not like option B at all. And we are on page 210. What you find is they get around to the 3 C's. They have a common interest for profit. They're trying to eliminate any conflicts and play nice together, and then they end up with compromises, and it just keeps going round and round and round. Now, in some instances, it will turn bad, and it will turn bad in a hurry. What you're going to be might look at in the worst case scenario for the company anyway is appropriation. The caffeine is wearing off. Expropriation, meaning the government will simply take the assets for whatever reason. Not necessarily because it's profitable. It could be because of other events, external events unrelated to the company. Interesting story. General Motors had a plant in Venezuela. I use the word past tense because of political turmoil, the factory wasn't turning out many cars anyway. They pretty much confiscated the plant. Once you're there and it turns bad, it is a sunken cost, meaning the money's already gone. Same thing as you burning it. There's no point in complaining about it. You're done. And sometimes the governments may flip. It could be other reasons. And the next thing you know, you have a dispute between the host country and the investors. And you're probably not going to get that back. Now, page 211, in our last portion for this particular chapter, or close to the last portion. What is the correct method? How are you going to figure this out? Well, you want to look at a couple of things, and what the book is referring to as the margins, back to the cost-benefit analysis. Benefits outweigh the cost, then you do it. And remember, cost isn't always monetary issues. There's reputation and things of that nature. Some companies don't want to work in other countries because maybe the labor laws are not what you would want in your country. There could be other things that make it just look bad for the company. So it's a multitude of things when we say cost and benefits. Do you have multiple users in the industry? Again, the first person there. Do you have other people coming in? Can you become the cost leader, or can you be the one who sets the bar? Do you have the ability to get talent in order to actually execute this? It won't do you any good if you have a very complex system and you don't have anyone who's talented enough to do it. If you're thinking primarily such as manufacturing of chips, most people think, well, that's pretty easy. You see them all over the place. Well, depending on the type of chip. Some of the chips are high-end and you need a clean room, meaning you're wearing overalls and gear that look like you're trying to do an operation. You may need very talented people in order to problem solve. If you don't have that, it's probably not a good idea, especially if you have to bring so many people in there. Now, whether or not it works, it gets fairly complicated, and it has to be done on an individual basis. All things being equal, is it a stable government? Currency exchange. Whether or not you think this is going to be a long-lasting venture. Political, social, does the community even want you there? They may need it, but they may not be trusting of foreigners. Everyone is protective of their own backyard. Last but not least, management, we're using everybody. Those at the top, those at the bottom, everyone has to be involved. So if you're going to do the foreign direct investment, you have to understand about how are you going to get into the other country. Are you going to buy them outright? Are you going to license? There are a couple other things that you could do. Which is the easiest? Which is the best long term? It may not be the cheapest. Do you want to invest that much? The location. Again, you now have the ability to understand the local market. Most large companies want to expand, and it's better to have boots on the ground in order to really understand what you are doing in another area. Last thing you want to do, one example, General Motors had a car, they call it Vega. Well, in Spanish, Vega means no go. If you had people who were on the ground and could explain why you might want to change the name to something else depending on the location, you probably could have avoided a lot of that. Also, there are other constraints. Again, the host country where you're trying to get to may have different social norms that you're not comfortable with. One thing you run into in some countries is the fact that a bribe is not a crime, it is expected. And at least in the US, bribing is a big no-no, even if it's the norm. So you go into another country and normally they're expecting a little money under the table and legally you're not allowed to do it. It creates a huge problem. All right, that about wraps this up. Again, contact your instructor if you have any questions. Feel free to go over your homework, take advantage of the resources available through the textbook, and I will see you in the next one.